ago the clock washed midnight away, bringing the dawn. Oh God, I must be dreaming. Time to get up again and time to start up again. Pulling on my socks now. Where did I go?
So here we go. So one way of starting what I wanted to talk about is this question of giving voice to that which has been rendered invisible. And of course, the night, for a very long time in our modernity, not in the past necessarily, was rendered invisible. We were meant to be in our homes, not out on the street or the park or whatever. And so that is sort of one image that might connect with some of the issues that you are working on. Now, so again, this heading is giving voice to that which has been rendered invisible. Second element, what are the analytic tactics that we need to deploy in order to get at the meaning of this condition? And so here are a few elements. So one is the need, and I feel this need very strongly actually in a whole series of domains, but the need to destabilize meanings that have become stable. And clearly when you bring in the night, you're already thinking a little about that, since most households want to stay away from the deep night, let's put it that way. So a second element is in the shadows of powerful explanations, right? And that is the night. Third element, when the territorial aspect exits conventional framings, when it becomes institutionally mobile, when it becomes nomadic, when it can alter the meaning of the national, of the local, of a whole condition in many diverse instantiations. In other words, a kind of unsettling of the familiar, but an unsettling that is a minimal unsettling. It isn't a destructive unsettlement. And so a final point in this list is the notion of making visible, narrating what is there, but not recognized. Now, complex institutionalizations that are constituted through specific processes and that arise out of struggles and competing interests, that's a very complex bundle that we probably mostly experience during the day. Because, and of course, the list that I just gave you, these are not simply attributes. These are elements that operate in many diverse ways. These elements are also interdependent as they maintain their specificity, even as they maintain their specificity. Each one can thus be identified. And so coming back, you know that you probably, some of you are aware that I really am somebody who has worked very, very much on the whole question of the territorial. And so here I would just add as a comment also, the territorial as opposite of landscape. And we might return to this maybe in the discussion. Many of you might not agree with that. Now, the specificity of a condition, it could be the night, it could be the day, it could be, a variety of things. But the specificity is partly conditioned by the level of formalization and institutionalization that a condition has. And the night does not have much of that. In terms of, again, the formalizing, the institutionalizing, the night is there. It's there every night. And all kinds of people are there. But it is not as recognized as the day. Now, across time and space, the territorial has been assembled into distinct formations within which they have had variable levels of performance. It's not just a generic. So again, across time and space, the territorial has assembled into many distinct formations within which they have had variable levels of performance. Now, here, you know, I have a whole variety of little details, but I don't think that this is the moment to get into it, and you can already imagine also partly what I might say. So let me just move more on the analytics of it. Now, the types of instruments and capabilities through which each specific conditionality, specific urban setting, specific day or night, etc., gets constituted, varies, as do the sites where each is in turn embedded. And those sites can be private or public, law or custom, metropolitan or colonial, national or supranational, and on and on and on. Landscape. Landscape is a condition that mostly exists during the day. What we might see during the day as landscape, we will not see as landscape at night. It's gone. It's not landscape. It's something else. And so there, what comes to mind for me is a bit this notion of embedding meaning. You know, the fact that meanings are embedded. So during the day, meaning X means X, and at night, that same X actually acquires a different quality, certainly if it is the deep night. Now, there are sort of territorial surfaces, not deep, the deep territorial, but territorial surfaces and formations that we keep making and that we have been making across centuries. Now, some of them, and I'm particularly interested in these, are a bit disruptive. Like we have managed to make, and I insist on the word make, dead land, dead water, etc., etc. We have managed also to make obsolescent all kinds of visual orders. They may still functioning, they may be still there, but they're not part of the geographies and the conditionalities, etc., that we consider to be there. So one way of thinking about in some of these ways is a kind of invasion into a familiar visual order. The fact of the invasion will unsettle the familiar and bring us back to some place which is a bit less familiar. Now, the question of security, which of course, when you think about the night in one of our big cities, security is a critical issue, clearly. Now, I became at some point particularly interested in how in the United States we have an enormous number of security regimes. We have, for instance, almost 2,000 government organizations and another 2,000 private companies that work on programs related to all kinds of semi-secret, like counterterrorism, the delinquencies that happen at night, homeland security, etc., across the United States. Now, Europe is a bit more reasonable than the United States, we all know that, and you wouldn't have that extreme. But in the United States, it's really quite extreme. Now, there are, for instance, if you just take the regimes of controlling what is happening. So there are an estimated 1 million people that hold top secret security clearances in the United States. Now, you can imagine that quite a bit of the work that they do is, of course, totally global, international, but quite a bit of it also has to do with what happens at night in major cities of the United States. So the night has all kinds of actors, that we usually do not necessarily think about. Now, if you take Washington, D.C. in the United States, which is, of course, a major city, et cetera, but Washington, in that area of Washington and the surrounding area, sort of, you have 33 major building complexes. This is not one building. This is many complexes for top secret intelligence work. And together they occupy 17 million square feet. This is the equivalent of 17 million feet is the equivalent of almost 3 pentagons, and the Pentagon is huge, right? Or 22 United States Capitol buildings. In other words, this is sort of an invisible existence. It's really not. It's not like the Pentagon that we all know about. No. This secret intelligence complex is another dimension. It's not easy to see it, not easy to find it, so to speak. But they occupy, I repeat, about 20 million square feet, which is the equivalent of almost 3 pentagons or 22 US Capitol buildings. In other words, it's a massive sort of structure, etc. The government regulates everything about these infrastructures. And clearly, the government, certainly in a country like the United States, in a country like Brazil, in a certain type of country, it regulates everything about these types of infrastructures. For example, the gauge of steel in fences. These are very particular elements. The grade of paper bag for hauling away top secret documents. The thickness of walls, in the buildings, at the operational buildings, and the height of sound-proofed floors. Now you understand that a lot of this happens at night. A lot of the work that these semi-secret or fully secret institutions have to work in, execute, etc., happens at night. But it also happens during the day, but you wouldn't see it. Now, in Washington, D.C., there are 4,000. This is just Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is not a very huge city, by the way. There are 4,000 corporate office buildings that handle, as I already alluded to, classified information. 4,000 corporate office buildings, not 4,000 buildings, but office buildings, etc., which can be very good, nor is it just in one, or 2 firms. No, it is in a lot of spaces. Now, they also keep growing. Now, maybe now under the current regime that we have in the United States, they're not keeping growing, And we have a rather reasonable head now of state, I must say. But all existing buildings in this setup that I'm describing, this is my version of the night. I know it's probably not your version, but this is also very much a story of the night. So I wanted to add it to, to the bundle of issues. So all existing buildings in this structure that I describe have to be checked, and new buildings have to go over from top to bottom, by all these experts from NSA, the very expert, they can see everything. it will, and no telephone connections, no familiar, for us familiar forms of telephonic communication, none of that. So we're talking about a rather serious kind of formation, if you want. Now, I want to turn to another element, another country, another world, another space, another mode of existing at night, often in an invisible way. But there it is all live, if you could just enter those buildings. And this has to do with China. Now, China, I just want to grab one particular little element that sort of then grows into something that is a bit closer to what you are working on. So China, this I'm quoting now. China says its land reclamation work, I don't know if you get land reclamation work, in the South China Sea is totally justifiable as it has sovereignty over the area. And this is the key point. In other words, a claim to sovereignty over what is to a very large extent, what if we would look at it, water. And the question that brings in my mind is, what is it that we humans, I as just a regular human at night in the city, experience in that way? In other words, something that is on some level visible, but that on the other side you feel, this is not my zone. I don't go here. Now, so this, this, if you want, the sovereignty area, the area of the sovereign. And I don't know how much work we in the social sciences have done that gets at that question. How does sovereignty play a role in the kind of control that certain actors, certain firms can have, even at night, when there are almost no people in deep in the night in many of the major cities? What happens at night in the Pentagon? All kinds of stuff happens. We know elements, so we know that all kinds of stuff. It's absolutely 24 hours. It goes on and on. It never stops. Now, back to this thing that I was just telling you now. The foreign affairs entities of major powers are very much in play in all of this, including, of course, in the night. Now, for instance, the Philippines has accused China of illegal building underwater. In other words, water that the Philippines may think that it should have access to, is now criticizing another country for building below the ocean level. This is an emergent condition. This is just one little example. There are quite a few, and especially when you, especially on, in this case, the Chinese, but also the Americans. So that is another very interesting way. Of course, a lot of this stuff becomes active at night, precisely because, there are many fewer actors at night that could impede, that could, whatever. So that to me is a very important little point. And just as a footnote, the BBC reports, so this is something under construction, that China is building new types of islands on reefs that are beneath the water level. Now, what it constructs might at some point also go above the water. But basically, so there is a kind of a night within the night that is not simply on land, but it's also happening at other levels. So, for instance, there are people who now, researchers, who have documented Chinese work to dredge tons of rock and sand from the sea floor to pump into some reefs in order to make those reefs operational, in other words, to strengthen the reefs, in order to make them operational so that people can actually work on them. Now, I think that one way of using or making use, if you want, of the type of analytics that I have been talking about is to suggest that the night, and I love the word, I just love just the word I really like, that the night is quite a space where all kinds of stuff is happening. We, the average, resident in a reasonable city, we simply don't even think about that, don't notice it, don't see it. And so one question that I have, and it's a question that I'm trying to work on, is what are the places in the world, the sites in a given city, where actually we can notice this? Number two, do we notice it? There is a lot of stuff that is happening that is material. In other words, it has a visual format, but we don't see it. We simply don't see that. And there are quite a few, some of you probably are aware of this, there have been quite a few efforts, text experiments, to construct them, and to construct them in a way that they are there in front of us, but we do not see them, partly because we don't recognize what it is. It's sort of an anonymous something. But it really is quite interesting, to think a bit about what that all entails. Now, let me begin to complete, because I would just love to have a conversation on the notion of the urbanizing of technologies. And I put that out here because that could be far more a people's, request, or to the advantage of people, if you want, rather than to the advantage of very powerful actors, of governments, of criminals, etc. What would it mean to have the capacity to urbanize a lot of the technologies? How far would that get us into this type of monster almost that I have been describing, which is very partial. Mostly we don't see it, but it is doing a lot of stuff every night. And on some level, it means that our streets, it's certainly in areas like, in the city areas where powerful actors are embedded and invisible at night, and we don't see them. And so one question that I have, and that I'm trying to do research on, and it's not easy, is walking in diverse cities, major cities, and noticing where there is complete emptiness and where the buildings don't tell us almost anything. And those are the areas that I want to really check into. I want to find out to what extent is it not simply housing where people are sleeping, or office buildings that are closed at night? To what extent are those also sites where a lot of this stuff is happening? As I was just describing for the case of the United States, the case of Washington, D.C. And so this notion, and now I'm going to complete, and maybe we can just have some questions, this notion of the urbanizing of technology. And by the urbanizing of technology, I'm trying to get at something that is different from how powerful governments deploy and develop technologies, and their invisibility, as opposed to the visibility of us. And anyhow, there is a lot that one could be saying about that. But So again, one way of thinking about it is that the specific technical capabilities of interactive technologies deliver their utilities through complex ecologies. That is a mouthful of categories. Secondly, I already indicated, these ecologies include more than just the technical. So we tend to think it's technical is fine, the technical is good, the technical is acceptable. Hell no. The technical is a very, very broad range. And a lot of the technical is a negative, no doubt about that. A negative on many, many different levels. A negative in terms of grabbing too much land. A negative in having too many, sources of controlling us, the citizens, etc., etc. Now, I would like to think about this urbanizing of technology, that it really should include the logics of users, including the logics of users who work at night, who want to be out on the street at night, who want to have more and more people at night, etc., etc. And then just to conclude, you can ask me questions about all of this, because I know that I talk probably a bit more abstract than you wanted to hear. But this notion of the city talks back. So not only city residents should be part of an open source urbanism. You understand the phrase open source, right? So I'm talking about an open source urbanism. Also cities should have. It's not just about, certain institutions. No. A whole city should have a kind of open source urbanism built in it. Not in everything, but in as much as possible. And this notion that the city talks back. The city lets you know when something is not working. Back to the night, back to people who like to be at night on the street with others or dancing or whatever it might be. One way of thinking about that is that the city talks back to power, and it allows, and it says, yes, you average citizen, you are entitled. So the city is both things. It can contain some of the most powerful and dangerous, etc., actors and elements, but it can also be the space that insists on spaces for its citizens. And I like to sort of bring in a little element that is just a little sort of thought. So let me give you an example of a very simple version of some of the stuff that I've been talking about. So here's the example. A car, an auto car, made for speed, distance, and difficult terrain, is reduced to something else in the traffic of a city's center. In other words, suddenly the car is no longer the bah, bah, bah. It's something else. Without touching it, the city, with its modalities, can actually reduce that car to moving very slowly, to not finding the parking lot, to put the, etc., etc. And so the image that I like there is the city has spoken. It tells you, you know what, car? You can drive on the street, you can do this, but you're not going to come here to this neighborhood, not here, or whatever, the other element that might be in play. So let me just conclude, and maybe we can continue with the discussion. I don't know if that is an option. But what I'm trying to do in this project is to really bring in these other elements into the discussion of the night. That it's not just what is happening in some of the good, strong cities, is that there is a nightlife. You will find a restaurant late at night, that which is very agreeable, very nice, and it should just be normalized, especially when you think that more and more workers now also have night jobs. And when they leave their jobs late at night, they might love to go to a pub or to a restaurant or something. So how do we, and it's another way of reducing the massive traffic that our big cities especially have, during the day, so that you can sort of redistribute. So to me, this is extraordinarily important. And I just want to leave you with that final image, besides some of the negatives that I mentioned, and maybe there are some questions, etc. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope that it all worked out, that you understood, and that you could see the slides, because I'm not sure that you did, but I hope you did. Bye-bye.